try and help us way back in the end of October, the beginning of November. I spoke to him about it, and then I pestered him and asked him if he would do it, and he eventually said yes, he would. So that's great. The man is a very, very, very busy man, and I mean a very busy man. Not only is he here tonight and going all over, Poole and everywhere else that he goes to, talking to people like ourselves, trying to help us and encourage us and tell us what UKIP is about. He's also an MEP, working in Brussels, Strasbourg, or goodness knows where else. And he's also standing for PPC in Stockport. So he's got that to do as well. So he's absolutely, I shouldn't use the word, he's knackered. But he's been very, very kind and given his time up to come and talk to us. So I think he deserves a big round of applause for Steven Woolfe, our MEP.
Great, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, can you hear me without the microphone?
Yeah.
Good, great. That's wonderful. Good evening, and thank you for being here. Thank you. Stephen, that was a wonderful introduction. I don't really know what to say, and after those speeches there, I think really I've got a lot to learn. When you promised me that I would have a warm welcome here tonight, I didn't realise that you were going to have it at 2 entrances to the door as I came in. Grateful for the way they blocked my car and made me travel around to a car park halfway around and run here with my bags over my shoulders, because that reminded me of a joke about a lawyer who was once late for a meeting, and he turned to the heavens and said, God, please, if you allow me to get there on time, I will give up smoking, I will stop the affair, I will honestly put the money back in the client's accounts. Suddenly he turned around and he saw a car parking space. He moved into it, put it and said, don't matter, I found one myself. And ladies and gentlemen, when I've often talked about audiences, I've said that the best audience is one that is intelligent, well-educated and drunk. Well, at least here today inside, I can see I've got the well-educated and the intelligent. I've just left the drunk outside. I am absolutely delighted to be here. It's the second time I've come to Bradford, and one of the reasons I've come here is because of the growth of the particular branch and the way that you are campaigning locally. For me, one of the great joys about working and being a part of UKIP is the way that we've just taken ordinary people who are not necessarily engaged in politics, who actually just looked around their ordinary lives and said, do you know what, something is wrong, and I am willing to stand up to the mantle and put some change. And here, on this platform, as you can see, with Harry, Owe, and Jason. Sorry, Jason, I shouldn't have done that so many times with me, I apologise. But I've done quite a number of meetings over last week. I think that you have not only 3 ordinary people, but 3 exceptionally ordinary people who have gone out there and can prove that they will be engaged with the public, they will be working hard for their constituency, and I believe that you have got 3 wonderful candidates to take Bradford forward in this general election. Now I've got one, Jason, because I know you're a man who likes jokes as well, so I'm going to finish off with one, because we made a telephone call to the Liberal Democrats and we asked them for a copy of their manifesto. And they simply said, I'm sorry, we've sold out. I said, I know you've sold out. As many of you know, and as Stephen has said, I am a MEP for the North West. I'm standing as the parliamentary candidate in Stockport. It's a place where I was born, well, just outside it. I was born in Moss Side, and I grew up at the bottom of the constituency in Stockport. My first job there was delivering newspapers in the local newspaper shop. My mum used to work on the market selling shoes, and I joined her there. We lived in a council house. Most of my family were Labour. And what's wonderful I can see here today is the change. We have Labour voters, we have non-voters, we have ex-Conservatives as well.
Yeah.
And Lib Dems as well. I didn't realise that. We have the full house.
We do.
And what it means that for me, growing up there, I was the only mixed-race child in the Catholic school, St Bernard's. Actually, I grew up there with Liam and Noel Gallagher. Liam Gallagher was in my class, Noel was in my brother's class. He's obviously gone on to much greater things. I've actually been referred to earlier today. I said I never recognised that you were mixed race. My grandmother was Jewish. She married a black American grandfather. I've got an Irish grandmother from County Kildare. It's my reason that I love tea, particularly as strong as possible. And my grandfather fought in the Second World War. For me, growing up at that time, I suffered actual real racism. Probably not so now because they look at me and they say, well, you're always pretty white. And I said, yeah, I'm probably faded like Michael Jackson, but actually naturally. But if you take a look at the picture of my daughter, you can see the genes and the colours in there. And despite all the time I've actually physically facing real racism in the 80s, when we had a period of time where our history said, for my grandmother as she came over in Manchester, signs that said, no Irish, no dogs, no blacks. We had moved on tremendously to a period where suddenly we had the National Front. And the National Front was simply wanting to get rid of anybody of any colour. And if Hope Not Hate and those people outside that room were listening to the differences between the political parties of then and to us now, they would understand fully that we are there with them. We join them in their hatred of anyone that wants to pick on people just because of the colour of their skin, because of their religious belief, because of their sexuality. We are not that political party, because we are a party of inclusiveness, which is why I wanted that man to have his say. And let's listen to some of the things that he said. He said, you're anti-Roma. Well, if we were anti-Roma, then why do we have a Roma MEP in Jim Carver? If we were anti-homosexual, then why do we have a homosexual MEP in David Coburn? Why is my assistant in Chester homosexual? Why is several of our spokesmen homosexual if we're against them? He said we're anti-women. Then why is it a political party that allowed everybody to choose whoever they wanted to have more women MEPs in the European Party for a political party in UKIP based on their skill and their ability if we were anti-women? The point is, when you look at their arguments and you place it with the facts, then they are the ones that are unfactual and wrong and just don't understand that this world has changed and this party is part of that changed world. And it was clear to me in my first speech in Torquay. I went down there having sat around the table with my mum and dad. My mum and brothers, my dad had passed away unfortunately. And I said that I'd been asked to go and give a speech in Torquay with that political party. And I said, look, all the press has turned around and given all these headlines about it. And I said, well, I'm a bit concerned about it. My mother went, listen, Stephen, you have to understand the press. The press need to sell papers. And to sell papers, they have to create a story. And this party looked new and interesting and different. And they don't necessarily like difference. Remember, many of them have probably gone to Oxford and Cambridge and stayed at the same universities of the politicians now in charge. They've probably dated each other. Well, that's clearly the case if you look at Flanders, who used to work for the BBC, is now at JP Morgan, who dated Miliband and Balls. There is perfect sense of that. So, but keep your eyes open, just go down. And when I went down to Torquay, and I did speak, what did I find? But ordinary people who were concerned about their country. They were concerned about the fact that they'd seen their neighbours at home, living in a single room, to try and ensure that they kept heat in that room because they couldn't afford the gas bills. And they were asking the questions why. And the questions were simple. Because we'd allowed the large corporates to take over our electricity and gas companies, and because we'd allowed the European Union to issue energy directives that have forced wind farms onto us, which has ensured that our electricity bills are higher, and they've ensured that we have to pay green taxes, so that the average family in this country now has to pay between £250 and £400 a year extra. That is fuel poverty, and that was caused by the EU and the political parties. And UKIP was saying, no, this is wrong. There were ordinary people there, just like my mum and my grandmother and my aunt, who were saying, what was wrong with our country when we start seeing people like you, Stephen, who were born on a working class estate, who managed to go to a grammar school, although mine was a grammar school, but they converted it into a private school when the parties had closed them down. What was strange about the fact that during the 70s and the 80s, more working class and lower middle class students were able to have an education. They become accountants and lawyers and teachers and doctors. They were able to have social mobility. They were able to get out of the environment and give money back to their families, to spread it around. And what happened with that? Well, on the left and the Labour Party, they said that's not going to work because we have an ideology almost based on communism, where we have a single school represents everybody, no matter what. And we had a Conservative Party under Thatcher that said, let's get rid of grammar schools. And here, in UKIP, ordinary people had said, we have seen the damage that has done to social mobility in this country, which is why we want a grammar school in every single town to bring back social mobility once again. They asked the question, why is it that the Labour Party had made a decision that you were going to exclude vast numbers of our students and young people in this country by saying that if you don't go to university, you are useless, you are stupid, you're a waste, because only if you go to university are you of any good. And you saw them closing down the technical colleges, the same technical colleges that allowed my uncle to start his career as a plasterer and now is a site manager. But his son today has to struggle to try and find apprenticeships because those technical colleges aren't there. But what do we see? We see those technical colleges thriving in Poland and Lithuania and Latvia. We see them of equal cause in Germany, where those technical colleges and the people that go to those technical colleges are seen to be equal as those who go to university. And here in UKIP, we had people at a conference arguing to bring back those technical colleges, make those students have something else that they want to go, but treat them equally and have no difference between universities and non-universities. That is social mobility, that is social justice. And there is a political party that recognised part of the reason public and the politics in this country had changed is because those political parties had come so close together that, in the words of Nigel Farage, you could hardly put a cigarette paper between them. And part of that drive was because they were now emaciated, unable to make power and change because of the overriding power that is held in the European Union. Now I know that when it comes to this particular point, some have heard this joke before, and I'm looking at one over there. But it is quite common. There was a farmer, and he saw in the distance a vast sports car coming towards him, the dust coming up behind him. The car screeched up in front of him. Out came this man in a wonderfully smart suit, great tan, great hair, wonderful Gucci glasses, rings on his fingers, fast watches. The man approaches the farmer and he says, "Excuse me, Mr. Farmer, if I can tell you how many cattle you have in that field, can I have one?" And the farmer looks at him and says, of course you can." Well, the man pulls out his latest laptop, connects it to a satellite, starts tackling in details. The satellite sends a message to Frankfurt. Frankfurt scans the whole area, sends it back. He pulls out a portable printer. The printer's attached, prints out the whole of the field, comes out and says, "You've got 1,367. The farmer goes, "My God, that's absolutely marvellous. You're right." He said, "Okay, go ahead." The man picks up the cattle and he tries to take it. He's trying to force it into the back of the car. When the farmer says, excuse me, just one question, yes? He said, if I can tell you what your job is, can I have my animal back? The man looks at him with a sense of smugness and says, yes, of course, you'll never guess. He says, I believe you're a European Commissioner. The man was stunned, he fell back and he said, well, that's correct, how did you guess? He said, well, basically, you came out of nowhere, uninvited and unasked. You came up with the latest equipment, which has cost millions. You've turned around and asked me a question that I already knew the answer to, but I didn't want asking. You don't know anything about me, you don't know anything about farming, you don't know anything about animals, because can I have my dog back, please? Ladies and gentlemen, the European Union was an ideal that when founded was good. It was an idea that wanted to bring peace and harmony to people in an age after a Second World War. None of us here wants to go to a period where we see our sons and daughters' bloods in the fields of Flanders again. But as the Pope, who visited the European Parliament in Strasbourg only a few weeks ago, and I sat not far away from him, probably less than the distance in this room, shocked and stunned the MEPs. You could sense their palpable annoyance and anger when he said exactly the same words but finished on this. He said, but the European Union has lost its way. It no longer represents the people of Europe anymore. It has become too insular, too concerned about power, too concerned about its own national interest. It's become lazy and old and effectively unfit for purpose. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the European Union is unfit for purpose, and those people in that conference in Torquay had recognised this a long time ago, and that is why we are also arguing to leave the European Union. We're leaving the European Union because the unfit for purpose is stemmed around the fact of a lack of democracy. When I used to grow, I had to get the 50 bus to go to my library in Manchester. Now, in my library in Manchester, that's where I was studying for my O-levels and my A-levels. But if you come out of that library, you'll see there is a cross and also now a plaque. And outside of that cross, it's a cross to represent something that is essentially seriously important to me. One of my political heroes is one of the men that was there that day, Henry Hunt, at the fields of Peterloo, where thousands of ordinary Mancunians and Northerners came together to stand on platforms simply to ask for the vote. It was the first time, although on separate platforms, that people had come together and allowed women to stand on a platform and ask simply for the vote. And what happened? We allowed soldiers to go in and murder our own citizens, bayoneting our own children. Thousands were injured, 15 were killed, simply for asking for the vote. But this was something that had already occurred. In Merthyr Tydfil, 32 people were killed by our own soldiers in the early 1800s, simply for asking for the vote. We asked women who stood in front of our own parliament, who were beaten by our own police, in the suffragettes, simply for asking for the vote for women. Our history has shown time and time again the elite, the authorities, beating our own citizens, beating them down because we demanded one thing: the ability to control those who run us, to control the elite, to have the vote because we recognised how important it was in the way that we needed to change our lives. To give us the NHS wouldn't have been here without the vote. To give us free education wouldn't have been there without the vote. To give us the opportunity to hold our politicians to account wouldn't have been there without the vote. And what did we do in 1972? Those politicians, having recognised we'd given universal suffrage to everyone in 1969, woman and man alike, we took it away from them in 72 when we handed it over to the European bureaucrats in Europe, and who now make the decisions over all our laws. And that is why I'm here in UKIP, because I don't believe in no democracy, the undemocratic European Union taking the vote away from the people of this country who have died to get it. I want to touch on that typical subject. I've talked about education and our health policy. I looked at this little paper from Hope, Not Fear, the awful truth about UKIP. Well, clearly, they've got it wrong. As we've said here, and you've heard already from Jason, privatising the NHS will never happen under UKIP. We were the only ones who will deal with the corporates who have made a profit from the 30 billion investment in PFI, 50 billion investment into PFI, and have made 300 billion. We're the only political party that says no more to that. You've had enough, you're not having any more. Free at the point of call for everybody, but no private financial initiatives, no more middle management stealing the money when it should be put into the services of our doctors and our hospitals, and no more for people coming to this country and actually using our services for free when we've got people here who can't afford it or get to their own doctors. Tax cuts for the rich. Well, that isn't there. Were we not the first political party stolen our policy by the Lib Dems, who said that there's no one on minimum wage should have to pay any income tax? And that policy is still firmly there. But we also recognise there are plenty of people who've been allowed, under the Labour Party in particular, who work hard, whether it's your teachers, whether it's your middle managers, whether it's your builders, who've managed to eke out a little living, who manage there with their families to get up to the ladder where they can get 30 or 40,000, who were dragged into the higher rate tax bracket because that's the way tax creep happens with parties like Labour and the Conservative Party. And we're the ones to say that shouldn't happen. We shouldn't have a tax on families trying to get out of a hole and build a life for themselves. This isn't taxes for the rich. This is taxes for the ordinary people working hard to have a life and a good family. Slashing maternity pay, lie. Reducing holiday pay on sick pay, lie. Schools for the elites, lies. But I would have that debate with them. I would go outside with a leader out there and say, look, I understand where you come from. I suffered the racism that you're trying to stop. But stop telling lies about me, my party, and the people in it. Because actually, we're much closer to the things that you even think about.
Well said.
I understand why, because it's the Labour Party in particular. My family of over 30 people who were once all Labour Party voters will never vote for them ever again. Under Gordon Brown and Tony Blair in particular, they moved themselves to a sense where they were supporting the rich and they'd left the people in seats behind. They were part of an elite in this country that feel it's better to feather their own nest than feather the nest of the populace of the people as a whole. But they're not only just supported by the fact they took the scandal of their own money that they took from their own benefits as MPs, or the fact that when you look at the Labour Party, when you're looking at Straw, when you're looking at Blair, where they're trying to put their own children into safe seats, building their own little empires for themselves. There's no difference between them and the Conservative Party who've been doing this for years.
No.
But they're also backed by a media elite and a television elite. An elite that looks like the journalist from who was once a Conservative candidate, who's now I've forgotten his name, who wrote during the election in Clacton that said the Tory party should leave Clacton well alone because it's a place where people go to die. Well, with Matthew Paris, he didn't recognise that already people had left the Conservative Party well alone anyway. We'd recognised that they have joined the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats in being all about themselves. And UKIP is not like that at all. Because, like Thomas Jefferson once said, the purpose of government is to enable people of the nation to live safely and in happiness. And our policies, by getting out of the European Union, to bring power back to ourselves, is to enable to do that. But I must touch on the difficult issue of immigration. It seems to raise its head with those outside. The chap here said that we were anti-immigrant. Well, there's nothing more than the truth from that at all. I am the migration spokesman. No, not the immigration spokesman, like the Labour Party or the Liberal Party, the Democrats or the Conservatives. I'm the migration spokesman because I am concerned not only about those coming to this country, the population in this country, and the effects of immigration in this country, but I'm also concerned on the effects of other countries if we allow the brain drains to occur from them. I have spoken to the Malawians and the Nigerians in their government who are concerned about their doctors and nurses. They ask the question, why is it that we train our own doctors and nurses? Why do we bother in doing so when you simply take them from us with higher salaries and leave us then having to come to beg for you to send us grants and donations to cover our medical history and look after our own people? We have our own selfishness in this regard, that we look at aid and those that can go and have nice little 6 or 9 month holidays to come back to their lovely upper middle class background and say, I've studied doctors, I'm now, look where I've been for 9 months looking after those poor Malawians. Well, that's an arrogance that I disagree with. Yes, have a good heart and help people generously. But we as a country should also understand the damage we do on other countries when we take those who've trained and worked hard to bring them here. And in doing so, we had 100,000 people apply to become nurses in this country. And we failed to bring in the proper training for them, give them the right opportunities. We've made it difficult for them to become nurses. And so in the end, we go off and steal nurses from other countries. There is something wrong in that. And I don't think that is the right immigration policy we have.
Bravo.
Because when we look at immigration, the very firm principle of UKIP is that we must have an ethical, open migration policy, open to all equally. That we treat everybody in the world equally. My grandfather's a black American. Why should he have to face a visa, but my Irish grandmother should not and come over easily? We have to treat everybody equally in the world. It doesn't matter to me if I'm sick and ill, and I have a German doctor or an Indian doctor. As long as they have the skills, can speak the language, know what our medical cares are, I don't care what country you're from. And nor does anyone in this room. We just want to be treated by the best people possible from wherever they are, but it must be on an equal, ethical basis. But in doing so, we must also understand the cost of an open-door migration policy that is open to the European Union, as well as the cost of low-skilled migration coming from the rest of the world. It is undoubtable from the evidence that we've got, from the OECD to even the European Union's own reports, that if you enable large-skilled migration from low-skilled people into a country, the effects on the home-based people, irrespective of who they are, colour or creed, whether it's those in the Bradford Muslim communities, whether it's those in the African communities in St. Paul's, whether it's the white communities of Stockport, where I am standing. If you allow large-scale migration, you push down wages, you increase competition, you allow the corporates to ensure the power to hire and fire much more easily. And that is why UKIP has said quite clearly, we believe in reducing the numbers of migration based on numbers to allow 50,000 a year, not 250,000 people a year. And that is the best way to have an Australian points-based system that picks and chooses the people that we need in consultation with business, universities and the communities, open to the whole world, everybody treated equally, but with the numbers reduced drastically each year. Then can we get the talent from across the world that we need? Whether it's the footballers who are playing for Manchester City or Man United, maybe you want to actually see them disappear. I quite frankly wouldn't mind. My brother plays centre forward for Stockport, so he's a very good over. I'd suggest that they take him and put him in. But the question is also about how we treat our own population. So let's hear no arguments that we're a racist party just because we believe in a managed migration policy. We don't. We believe a managed migration policy because it works for everybody in this country. So I'm going to finish with this little story about Osborne. Osborne is jogging down the street when he sees a little boy in a corner with a box. And he looks at that box and he says to the boy, "Excuse me, little boy, what's in the box?" And the little boy turns around and he says, "It's a kitten." He said, "My word, what type of kitten is it?" And the little boy says, "It's a Conservative kitten." And Osborne puffs up his chest, jogs on a couple of yards, jumps into his ministerial car, takes him around the corner to his house. 3 days later, he's out there jogging, this time with the Prime Minister, and he turns to David and he says, "David, look, there's a little boy over there in a box. I've got something special for you." They jog over them, cameras, the whole media there, and he says to the little boy, he says, "Excuse me, little boy, what's in the box?" Well, this time the little boy turns around and says, "Well, I told you 3 days ago." He said, "No, please tell me." He says, "It's a kitten." And he says, "What type of kitten is it?" The little boy looks up and he says, "It's a UKIP kitten." And Osborne's shocked. He said, "But 3 days ago, you said it was a Conservative kitten." And the little boy retorts. He said, "Yes, 3 days ago its eyes were closed, but now its eyes are wide open." The eyes of that little kitten is open. The eyes of the public in this country are also open. They're open to a party that they know when it says something, it means something. They know that they will fight the hard fight and take the beatings and the bullying from the media because they believe it's right. They believe in democracy in this country. They believe in an NHS and a fair education. They believe that the people in this country are one of the greatest nations in the world and that everybody looks after one another. They believe that we should have housing that looks after and decently for the people in this country. They believe we should be looking after our own armed services. We shouldn't be not giving them equipment, and when they leave, we should be giving them jobs and ensuring that they're well looked after. They know that we have a country that we can be proud of. They know that when they said we will fight elections, that we had no councillors, we now have 500. When they said that we couldn't get MPs, we now have 2. And when they said that we would lose the European election, not only did we not lose, but we beat the main political parties the first time our country has known it in 160 years. Yeah. They know there is a party out there for the people of that country, and I am proud to be part of that party. I know these gentlemen are proud to be part of that party, and I thank you for being part of that party too. Thank you.